Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining me again for these short morning Bible studies. We're continuing to work through Psalm 42, and in the process we're discovering what it was that made the psalmist downcast and some of the things that make us feel depressed. So far we've looked at the topic of spiritual dryness and spiritual loneliness, and today we're going to be concentrating on what I've called spiritual weakness. If you've attempted to share your faith with anyone during these difficult days of COVID-19, it's possible that people may have said to you, "Where is your God in this coronavirus pandemic?" Or "Why doesn't your God do something to stop it?" A woman said to me 2 weeks ago, "I don't believe in your God. I think your God is a monster. Look at the wars in the Old Testament. And what kind of a God would send his son, Jesus, into the world to be sacrificed? And where is your God anyway in the midst of all this mess as a result of this virus?" Questions like this can be very difficult when we seek to come up with answers to try and satisfy our questioners. They can be painful too if people are particularly aggressive and we think they're trying to undermine our faith. We can feel wounded in spirit and really downcast. Well, again, we're not alone with these kind of feelings, because this is what happened to the man in Psalm 42. This is what he wrote. "My tears have been my food day and night, while men say to me all day long, 'Where is your God?'" He is depressed. He's weeping day and night, and all because he's being tormented by those who are saying to him, "Where is your God?" His tears are a sign of weakness rather than strength. He seems to have nothing to say to those who are tormenting him. In verse 10, he again refers to the same discouraging emotions. "My bones suffer mortal agony as my foes taunt to me, saying to me all day long, 'Where is your God?'" When he states that his bones are suffering mortal agony, he's illustrating what happens to us spiritually can affect us physically, how our emotions affect the way our bodies function. He's aching in body as well as in spirit. He is really downcast. It's interesting, but we know from history that heathen idolaters used to tease the Jews about worshipping an invisible God. They saw it as a huge joke. Fancy worshipping somebody you cannot see. Our gods are visible and tangible. We can introduce you to them. Come to our temples. You can see them. You can touch them. They have ears and eyes, hands and feet and mouths. But where is your God? Your God is inactive, and he doesn't seem to be doing much to help you. Just look at you in your depressed state. Any depressed person is deeply wounded when ridiculed by people who don't believe in God, especially when that person is already down in the dumps. It only adds to their misery. This man is feeling the pain of emotional and spiritual persecution because of his faith in God, and he is weakening and giving in to depression. And we live at a time when much of what we believe is ridiculed and rejected by some of the scientists, evolutionists, humanists and atheists. And how we behave is also ridiculed. Our morals are considered by those who are against us. They think we're living in the dark ages because we believe in chastity, no sex before marriage, and fidelity, absolute faithfulness after marriage. And so we ask the question, why do we, like the man in Psalm 42, face opposition and persecution? Why should people who are living good and upright lives and seeking to be responsible members of the community end up suffering? It seems so unjust. Well, if we want to know the answer, we only need to turn to Jesus' teaching in the Sermon on the Mount. This is what he had to say. Unfortunately, the psalmist didn't know this teaching. "Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, falsely say all manner of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Let's take time to try and unpack some of the teaching of Jesus. It will help us next time we are ridiculed for our faith. Jesus speaks about being persecuted for righteousness' sake. That really means being loyal to the truth. Mind you, some Christians invite opposition and persecution by their brashness and insensitivity and weakness, and by their bad behaviour at work. They have no one but themselves to blame if they're ridiculed and rejected for being difficult and irritating to live with. But the reason Jesus gave was quite the opposite, because of righteousness, just doing what is right, being loyal to the truth that he taught, living out the principles of the Sermon on the Mount. We need to understand that persecution is the result of a direct clash between two completely value systems in the world. True Christians are the conscience of society. If we're never persecuted, it may be because we compromise and never stand up for Jesus and the truth. And then he says, you'll be persecuted because of me. And it does come because of loyalty to Jesus. And Jesus was totally honest with his first disciples and to those of us who follow him later. If the world hates you, keep in mind it hated me first. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you. And loyalty to Jesus as a person, as well as loyal to his word, will bring us into conflict with those who just cannot cope with his teaching or his godly example. People will either be convicted and respond positively, or their consciences will be disturbed and they will lash out aggressively. Jesus also taught them the reality of persecution. He told them 3 things they would experience. They will insult you. You see, persecution isn't limited to physical abuse. It includes verbal abuse, insults, and spoken malice, such as the man in Psalm 42 experienced. We may not have been beaten or thrown into prison because of our faith, but many of us may have been laughed at because of what we believe. And then Jesus says, they will accuse you falsely. They will falsely say all kinds of evil against you. This happened to the early Christians. Did you know they were falsely accused of eating flesh and drinking blood in their services? They were falsely accused of immoral practices because of their love feasts when they greeted one another with a holy kiss. And they were falsely accused of being revolutionaries because they spoke of the end of the world and of Jesus coming to rule and reign as king. As it was then, so it is today, especially when other religions dominate and rule. Christians are often falsely accused of blasphemy in order to beat, imprison and kill them. And then Jesus said, they will persecute you. And the persecution of those early Christians was horrendous. Crucified on crosses, thrown to the lions, made to face other brutal and inhuman tortures. The things they had to suffer were terrible beyond description. But we're no more civilized in the 21st century than they were in the first century. I recently heard of a man who left the religion of his family and became a Christian. As a result, he had his throat cut because he was sharing with others his newfound joy and faith in Jesus. But Jesus finally taught how they were to react when they were persecuted and ridiculed by others. They were not to retaliate and fight back, nor were they to become resentful or resigned in spirit and take the attitude, this is my cross and I suppose I'll have to bear it. No, surprisingly, they were to rejoice and be glad. This is not natural, it's a supernatural response, and it's only made possible by the Spirit of Jesus living in his followers. The apostles rejoiced after they had been beaten for preaching about Jesus. They said they counted it as something worthy in order to suffer disgrace for his name. Paul and Silas were singing hymns to God at midnight after being stripped and beaten in public and thrown into prison. They were rejoicing even though their backs were bleeding and their feet were throbbing in the stocks. They turned that dark and foul inner prison into a sanctuary of worship. Their exuberant praise was such that the other prisoners heard them. And God couldn't hold back any longer. He sent an earthquake to release them. And then the results of persecution. Jesus said they would be rewarding. Great is your reward in heaven. Persecuted Christians may seem to lose everything on earth, but they will inherit everything in heaven. We may be rejected and ridiculed now, but we will be honoured by God when we enter into his presence. The apostles never lost sight of this eternal perspective, and nor must we whenever we're being criticised or ridiculed. Paul wrote, "Our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us." And again in Romans 8, "Our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all." And he said all of this is reassuring, for so persecuted they the prophets who were before you. Christians can rejoice because we're part of a noble succession, a long line of prophets and saints before them who suffered because of their faithfulness to God and who learned to find joy and strength in God in the midst of their sufferings. So next time we're taunted for what we believe, let's remember this important teaching of Jesus. A brief prayer. Help us, Lord Jesus, when we are ridiculed and rejected because of you, to be encouraged because you will always be with us, and you will be our wisdom and strength when people taunt us and say, "Where is your God?" Teach us to rejoice for the privilege of being part of the shame and pain that you had to bear. Enable us always to see the bigger picture, one that will inspire us when we consider being with you and receiving our reward in heaven. Help us all to be faithful to you, even unto death. Amen.